All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is Claret Vargas, and I'm happy to have you here in a panel on how legal tech is furthering human rights and access to justice. Whoa, there's a lot of echo here. I'm the executive director of the Human Rights Center here at Stanford, and I'm a lecturer on law. At the Human Rights Center, I have been focusing on movement building by making knowledge about human rights law in general and the inter-American system in particular more accessible. Our center co-director, Jim Cavallaro, is right here, and he is a professor of law and a member of the Inter-American Commission. So our center focuses on the region of the Americas quite a bit. I also focus on human rights and corporate accountability, and of late I've been working on the palm oil industry in Indonesia, and before returning to human rights practice, I was an employee-side litigator working on class action to enforce wage and hour laws and the protection of workers. I've also worked in alien tort statute litigation, so I'm more than excited to welcome our panel whose work hopefully you've had a chance to see in the materials for the conference. And I'm excited that we have a panel on working to improve conditions on human rights and access to justice for diverse populations. And our panelists here have drilled down on specific aspects of this quest for helping people claim their rights more effectively. I want to take the time to introduce them, even though you may have already read their bios, because their work is so interesting. And then I'll mention some common themes and move on to questions. The idea here being that as we ask questions, everybody will be able to present and discuss their work and their experience, and we'll avoid individual presentations and instead get right to discussions. So I have Alexa Koenig over here. She's the executive director of the Human Rights Center and a lecturer at UC Berkeley. She's an expert on U.S. detention and drone policies, as well as the potential for technology to help bring war crime suspects and human rights perpetrators to justice. She's a specialist in intellectual property and technology law and a member of the Technology Advisory Board for the International Criminal Court's Office of the Prosecutor. She leads meetings and workshops on the role of tech in human rights investigations. Alexa has co-authored publications on Guantanamo interrogation and detention practices and their consequences, on extreme punishment, and the pursuit of war crime suspects since Nuremberg. She co-teaches an undergraduate and graduate level classes and seminars on human rights and war crimes investigations. Alexa's work addresses the challenges of getting high-profile human rights abusers behind bars using traditional evidence collection methods by furthering technological capacities of international prosecutors and investigators. We'll hear a lot more about that. Bonnie Hough, apologies, is the managing attorney for the Center for Families, Children, and the Courts of the Judicial Council of California, and she oversees its access to justice, self-help, family law, domestic violence, and tribal state programs. She manages the Sargent Shriver Civil Council Pilot Project and the Equal Access Fund, which provides over $24 million in funding for legal services agencies and has been employed by the Judicial Council since 1997. The focus of her work is on helping courts meet the needs of people who cannot afford counsel in civil cases. And before joining the CFCC, she was in private practice in family law and was a founder of the Family Law Center in Marin County. She's received numerous prestigious awards for her work to increase access to the courts for low-income persons and serves on the boards of the National Self-Represented Litigation Network and the American Bar Association Standing Committee on the Delivery of Legal Services. Chris Jochnick is to the right of Alexa, and he's the director of private sector at Oxfam America. He leads Oxfam America's work on business and development, including shareholder engagement, value chain assessment, and collaborative advocacy initiatives. Some of the work at Oxfam that has inspired us is its use of a human rights impact assessment tool called Getting It Right, and the pilot projects that have emerged from its use so far. Chris has initiated a variety of innovative partnerships with Fortune 500 corporations. He's the co-founder and former director of 2 nonprofits devoted to economic and social rights, has worked for more than 18 years on issues of human rights and corporate accountability, including 7 years in Latin America. Before joining Oxfam, he was in private practice with Paul Weiss, where he advised companies on environmental and social responsibilities. and he teaches on business and human rights at Harvard Law School. He's also a former fellow of the Echoing Green and MacArthur Foundations. Jake Heller, next to me, is the founder and CEO of Casetext. It's a company that seeks to address access to justice problems by making available all legal cases, statutes, and regulations online for free, and building a community of lawyers who add annotations and additional context to those laws. He was president of the Stanford Law Review and managing editor of the Stanford Law and Policy Review, and he clerked for the Honorable Michael Boudin in the First Circuit. He was also an associate at Ropes & Gray, and I hear he's been programming since he was a child, and he was a web developer before law school. And finally, Oren Yakobovich is the CEO of Videre's Credere. It's an NGO focused on equipping oppressed communities with customized technology to uncover information from places where media can't or won't go. He has been working at the intersection of human rights and filmmaking for 20 years and is a leading voice on how to use visual information to create sustainable, lasting, positive change in areas of conflict. He co-founded Videre in 2008, and before founding Videre, Oren led the video department at the Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem. At B'Tselem, he developed Shooting Back, an award-winning video project that has trained hundreds of citizens in the West Bank who live in the most dangerous places to use cameras to fight for justice. Prior to his work, in his human rights NGO, Oren made several documentaries focusing on social justice issues. He also served in the Israeli army as an officer in an infantry unit and became a conscious objector after witnessing injustice in the occupied territories and served a period of time in the army jail. And Oren is also an Ashoka Fellow. So, rather than go around the table and ask each panelist to give us a summary of what they do, I thought we would jump into discussion questions and let our panelists describe their work, as I said. So the first round of questions is about technology and community engagement. And I have two separate sets. For Oren, Alexa, and Chris, in your publications or in the coverage of your work, there's an emphasis on community-based, location of microphone problem. So there's an emphasis on community-based or bottom-up approaches to understanding and addressing the issues that each of your organizations focuses on. So could you elaborate first on the importance of this approach and the practical implications of the approach, and second, on the contrast that you see between community-based and top-down approaches to the very same problems? And I'm interested in the ways in which you see this issue from a general human rights perspective, but also how you see the issue when it comes to using technology to address human rights issues. So,
shall I start?
Yeah, sure.
A minute about what we're doing. So basically, very simply, we equip oppressed communities in hard-to-access areas with cameras to document human rights violation. But because in most of the places that we work in, it's too dangerous just to pull phone or camera, we're working undercover and building hidden equipment for them to be able to be in places and document human rights violation. So this is what we're doing, and this is it's a very simple way to do it, to say it, because there's a lot of layers of security and how you build an operation. The camera in the end is just a tool, and people can be in a major risk if they're doing it without a really in-depth understanding of the security that they have to impose before they're doing this kind of work. So this is generally what we're doing. So we have around 500 people carrying cameras undercover in a variety of places in the world, bringing evidence of human rights violation. Now, one of the reasons that I decided to do it, and it's already started in B'Tselem, is because without getting the evidence from the people that are suffering, it's very hard to understand what's happening, especially in places that are remote. And when I would start working in the West Bank, and just before we did the project, the situation was that whenever a Palestinian was attacked by Israeli settler, whenever they went to the police and file a complaint, the settlers will come and say, no, he was attacking me, and automatically they will trust the settlers because, obviously, the moment you had a video, the whole equation's changed. So suddenly you have somebody that is objective. Now we can debate if the visual is objective or not, of course, but the moment you have something to work with, then the whole conversation is shifting. And it's very, very important that people that are suffering themselves will be able to film. Now there's also different layers, not just the legal layers, there's the empowerment layers and the ability to shift the struggle and basically challenge the classical power structure between governments and citizens. And the moment you're turning it around, then you have completely a new discussion. So this is why we're doing it from the ground. In many cases, the ground also telling you a story that you will not see from above. If you want to work in a country and you start doing investigation and you're meeting the government's official, you're meeting big organizations, you're hearing a story about what they all think happening there. And sometimes when you start listening to the ground, you understand that the agenda is not exactly, the story is not exactly the same stories. And a lot of time, a lot of big organizations are building their own perspective and the way they want to work based on all kind of knowledge that might change or was not complete. And then they implement each project, they implement all kind of theoretical ideas that back up with a lot of money that they're bringing back to the situation, and it's very hard for them to shift and change. So a lot of time, hearing the ground, the most important thing, and it will change the perspective.
Great. Chris?
Is this working? Thanks. Okay, great to be here. Thanks for the invite, and great panel. I felt a little out of place because I am decidedly low-tech, but I'll make the most of it, and that first question gives me a chance to talk a little bit about less technical type of things. So I come from Oxfam. Prior to Oxfam, I did a lot of work on economic and social rights. Oxfam is sort of a similar line of work, a lot of economic and social issues, and I think that colors my perspective a bit on human rights. When you work on economic and social issues like poverty and development, you're in it for the long term, and you come to understand that top-down solutions are often Pyrrhic victories, that they won't last, that you may get a government change, you may get some kind of reform from a company, let's say, but if you haven't built the grassroots, if you haven't built a stronger civil society, you won't be able to really ensure that change is durable and sustainable. And so groups like Oxfam long ago decided that poverty was not going to work, poverty alleviation couldn't work as a top-down enterprise, giving out food, building hospitals, whatever it was. And we adopted a different model, which we call a rights-based approach, which is all about really empowering people at the grassroots, funding them, helping them, building their capacity, giving them space so that it's their voice and not ours. On the one hand, and then we turned to campaigning on the other, global campaigning to create more space for those voices. And my sense is that that's always been a little tough as a shift for the human rights community. The human rights community, the mainstream human rights community has come at it a little bit differently, the endeavor, and I think in part because much of human rights work involved individual cases, torture, let's say, or somebody's in jail, and you can get somebody out of jail with a top-down approach. It's often an easier approach, but you can't really change the long-term underlying conditions unless you're willing to do the harder, messier work of building a local human rights movement. And I think that that has been, because of who populates the human rights movement and because the fact that it has often focused on these individual civil and political rights, the human rights movement is still somewhat lacking in terms of appreciating the importance of a bottom-up approach. And I see that a lot in my own work, both the development community, but also working with human rights groups, that to the differences and to why there are some challenges there. It's messier, it's longer term, it's not well funded often. It doesn't give you the sort of tangible, quick victories that your funders or the newspapers may be looking for. There's just so many reasons why conditions move people towards top-down, quicker approaches rather than the more longer-term community-based work. Happy to talk a little bit more about it, what that means in the context of a community-based tool for human rights impact assessments, but just as a quick overview, that's my sense of some of the differences and some of the politics behind them.
Great, and I'll follow up on the specific technology issue in a minute, but I'll let Alexa answer the question.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here. So the Human Rights Center at Berkeley Law is particularly dedicated to talking to survivors of mass atrocity and human rights abuses about what they need and what they're going through so that we can advise government entities, non-governmental organizations about how to better address those needs going forward. Increasingly, a big part of our work has been looking at witnesses who are called to testify at courts trying these major cases, and realizing that particularly when you're talking about prosecuting some of the world's most egregious human rights abusers, witnesses can be incredibly vulnerable to either retaliation and to other experiences that they've had on the ground. So one of the things that we've really been exploring through our new Tech and Human Rights program is how can technology better meet the needs of those witnesses and survivors? How can it also be used to supplement their testimony? So for example, if a survivor of a human rights or war crime abuse has to travel thousands of miles to go to a court, and that's going to disrupt their entire family and their livelihood, are there ways that technology can help provide information both to make sure that that witness's time in court doesn't become worthless because it can't be corroborated, and or can it step in when you don't necessarily need a live person in their place? So one example, we'd been working closely with the International Criminal Court trying to figure out why so many of their cases were falling apart at a fairly early stage of trial. And one of the things that we found is that they were relying on witnesses and NGO reports, but not really getting primary evidence. One of the problems and the reasons that was because they can't get into countries where these abuses are happening quickly for diplomatic reasons, for legal reasons. But yet there are millions of people around the world and in these areas where conflict are happening, many of whom have smartphones, who are cataloging the abuses as they occur, and or are collecting information about what has just occurred. So one of the big challenges that we've had is how do we connect those thousands of people, those millions of people, to help support this effort for justice?
Great. So I want to follow up on the technology question, but first I want to ask a similar question to Bonnie and Jake, in that one of the elements here that I'm hearing is empowerment, right? Empowerment of certain communities or certain populations, and how do we create access to justice from a bottom-up approach, meaning empowering a community to claim those rights themselves. And so what have been some of the technology answers and also some of the non-technology answers that both of your organizations have offered? So I'll let Bonnie start,
Okay.
and then Jake.
Okay, well, I think one of the things that many people don't realize is that the vast majority of people who come to court in the United States now come without an attorney. Over 4.3 million people come to court in California without a lawyer. 80% of the people getting divorced do not have a lawyer by their side. 90% of the people getting a restraining order in a domestic violence case do not have a lawyer by their side. 90% of tenants do not have a lawyer by their side when they're getting evicted. And interestingly, 30% of landlords don't have a lawyer with them. So we can say, oh, well, it's an uneven playing field. I'm just here to be a referee. Good luck. Hope it works for you. Or the court can change its practice and say, guess what? We're in a new court world today. Things are changing, and we need to readjust what we do. And part of it, there was a study done a few years ago about where poor people go to get help when they have a legal problem. And this was a study in Orange County. White people went to court. Latino people went to community agencies, and Vietnamese people said, I would go to the police if I had a legal problem. So we need to think through those different ways. And nobody said, I'll go to legal aid, or I'll go to a lawyer, or I'll go someplace to get that kind of assistance. So lots and lots of people come to court. So in California, we have a rule of court that we have attorney-supervised self-help centers in every court in California to help people with their problems and to help explain the process. And we use technology because, guess what, 4.3 million people is a lot of people to be working with. In Los Angeles County, we have one center that's about the size of this room that serves 300 people a day with their divorce pleadings, with 3 attorneys, some paralegals, and trained college students. And the way they do that is using document assembly technology. Mark O'Brien, thank you, for helping us work through programs where people can put in the basic information for their case. It fills out most of the forms. And then for more complicated legal issues, we have a workshop, and we go through with the attorney or a trained person and ask questions and help people really navigate their case. And I have to say the pleadings are actually much better than a lot of attorney pleadings that I see as a result of using the technology. So that's one thing. In rural communities, we're using video conferencing technology, Skype types of technology. So if we have an attorney in one location, they can be talking with somebody in in a neighboring jurisdiction, or if we have a Spanish-speaking person in one location, they can be talking with someone and providing information and assistance in a much more culturally competent as well as accurate way. So there are all kinds of ways. We're learning how to build into court case management systems mechanisms to say, here are the points in the case where you need to move the case along, because most of us were not born learning civil procedure. It's just not intuitive that at this month you do this and at this point you do that. So learning how to build those systems to send out text, to sound out alerts, to say, here's what you need to do. Did you know that there's something else you needed to do? Here's a link to get to that information. Or, of course, you can come in and get help. Many of the people that we see in the self-help centers do not automatically go to technology. And a lot of times they want to talk to somebody. They want to have that opportunity. And I think that's very important. We are not going to displace people. But for other people, the opportunity to be able to get help 24/7 with use of technology is also incredibly important, or the ability to ask one question, not take a day off work. So one of the things we have a self-help website that the California courts have developed, has 4,000 pages of information. It's totally translated into Spanish, and many materials are into other languages. You can do basically all the forms with instructions for pretty much any case that most people will go to court in on their own. And we're just continuing to build that. We'll be able to do more video for people who learn better through video. We'll be able to model skills-based techniques in terms of mediation, negotiation. How do you write a business letter? Most people just don't grow up learning those skills, and we can teach them so that to the extent most people, frankly, don't want to come to court. And we would love to help them take care of their issue in another way if that's possible. But then we free up the time in court for those people who really need the level of assistance that a court can provide.
Thank you, and I'll let Jake speak.
Sure. So we're using technology to address the access to justice problem in a slightly different way than the other panelists, in that we believe a core component of access to justice is access to information. What Casetext essentially is a legal database that includes both the primary source of the law, but also a growing and large database of community-contributed content, mostly from practicing lawyers, that makes the law understandable. What is actually happening in this case or in this area of law? And it's interesting, a bit of a personal story, the reason why I started this company. I went to Stanford Law, and I was involved in a lot of the local community clinics. I remember once working with a lawyer in East Palo Alto who can only access online legal research systems for 20 minutes a day. And that really shocked me. In a world of Wikipedia, in a world of Yelp, right, in a world where information has changed so dramatically, the idea that we'd have somebody who can't access the law itself for more than 20 minutes a day because that would cost too much really woke me up to the realities of the world. And in this area in particular. And so for a very long time now, I had thought, okay, what if we can take the same approaches that liberated information in other fields, including, I think the best example is Wikipedia, using the technology of the internet to make a massive project, which could take, thousands of collaborators, and build something that is as good, if not better than, the things that you have to pay thousands of people otherwise to build with you. And the way we think about it is, not only making direct access to the primary source documents is a very important first step for lawyers who otherwise cannot afford it. For example, the other next important step is to make this information understandable. And what this does, it actually honestly started as a tool for lawyers who could not afford other things, and it quickly evolved. Actually, we now have 300,000 users. not all those users are lawyers. A lot of the people who use the site not to contribute but to gain information are precisely the kind of litigants that Bonnie was talking about. People who come to court without a lawyer and who are looking for answers to information from our community of attorneys or in the primary source documents itself. It's actually kind of weird, I think, that until very recently, it'd be really hard for somebody who is thrown into the legal system to actually get access to the laws themselves, which I think is another kind of huge problem. Another thing that we've been seeing, another kind of general point I'll make about technology and the way that it affects access to justice is if the tools that lawyers have to use to represent clients cost a certain amount of money, then that is a cost of doing business for them. And if they have to pay, for example, thousands of dollars a month or tens of thousands of dollars a month just to access the law itself, then that price is out of there. That makes it almost impossible or very difficult for at least attorneys in private practice who have to pay for such tools themselves to represent clients and who may not be able to cover those costs, let alone all the rest of the costs. And one of the things that we've been seeing is that by reducing the costs of legal information, you're actually enabling people to enabling lawyers to represent people that they may not have otherwise been able to, which has been a really, really interesting thing to see over the 2 years that we've grown.
Great. So I want to go back to the technology element of Oren's work and Chris's work, in that first I just want to give you a chance to describe the Human Rights Impact Assessment tool, and perhaps we can talk about that around the topic of trust verification and evidence, which seems to be something that is actually, again, a recurring theme throughout. But how does the technology you use to both educate and empower communities in combination with this community-based approach, how do you deal and address issues of verification, of building trust in the product that you produce, and in kind of making, that's on the one hand in terms of trust of the product, and on the other hand also making the community comfortable and willing to trust the technology and the methodologies that you're using. And again, this might be, it's an unorthodox panel because we're both working with court-based questions, but also remembering that human rights advocacy, in human rights advocacy, the courtroom is just one tool, and broad-based advocacy and appeal to the public is a very large element of it. So maybe I'll go in the reverse order this time and let Chris speak, and then go to Oren. And again, if any of you have interventions, just jump in.
Okay, thanks. It is a little bit, there's a little bit of a disconnect in my head between the presentations, because thinking about access to justice in the U.S. looks very different than thinking about it in other contexts, Myanmar, Guatemala, India, wherever it is, right? Mm-hmm. And so the tool that we work with, it's called the Getting It Right tool. It's a community-based human rights impact assessment. It has to be understood within this context of large-scale private investment in developing countries where traditionally communities and other stakeholders who are affected by that development really have very little say over what's happening in ways that are affecting their water supply, their land, their working conditions. They will often be pushed out or evicted for a palm oil plantation or a new copper mine or whatever it is. And on the books, increasingly, human rights has taken up these issues, especially for indigenous people, and have come up with norms like free, prior, and informed consent, and some of that has been baked into some of the national laws, but it's really been very difficult for the communities to get any kind of traction around those norms because the laws are simply not enforced. And at the same time, you have a movement now that's gained a lot of traction, largely started at the UN level around business and human rights, and a set of norms that has been developed by the United Nations that has begun to require companies to do due diligence on the investments that they make, and as part of that, they are being asked to do these human rights impact assessments. And so we have now sort of a cottage industry of human rights impact assessments. It's like the environmental impact assessment movement 50, 40 years ago here in the US, and then it was social impact assessments. Now it's human rights impact assessment, but it's a very top-down enterprise. And so the companies will sometimes, the better ones, they will go out and talk to the communities. They will get the sort of information that they think they need. In a way, they're instrumentalizing the communities in the process of that, and they consider that to be good stakeholder engagement, and sometimes it's a little bit better than others. But the communities are no better off for that sort of engagement. They are just a means to largely a risk management ends of these companies. And so we've tried to flip that on its head and say that human rights impact assessments really have to start with the people who are affected. They have to be the drivers of this process. We've created this guide and a tool where the communities will come together with outside support groups like an Oxfam or others, and we'll talk about the issues that affect them within a framework of human rights. And often it's a new, human rights can be somewhat of a foreign concept. And so the process of reframing harms that they've experienced or potential harms as human rights and coming to understand that normative framework can be helpful in their struggles, and using that as a platform for then engaging companies, the government, other actors, can be a very effective process. But it is the process itself that's important. And so to the question of, well, how verifiable is the information or how authentic it is, in my mind, that's almost secondary. It's important, and we want any evidence that comes through from these sorts of studies to be as strong as possible, but these sorts of studies are not going to wind up in courtrooms generally. I mean, they might, but for the most part, they are political documents. And as political documents, they still have to be strong, but it is a political document, and it's, it is a person's experience, and how that person experiences a situation may be difficult to quantify. And so evidence and authenticity are important, and we want to, as I say, we do our most to get there, but I think it has to be understood within this broader political process where the process of getting communities to talk about these issues and frame them as human rights and drive a human rights impact assessment, which could be a 6 or 12-month process, and start using that as a tool in their local struggles is really what the idea is. And that process, whether or not that document ever reaches a higher authority and changes somebody's mind, would be good and it's important, but really the process itself is what we're after.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to add that, the tool itself, if I can describe it, is a kind of an interactive tool to follow this methodology so that you can use it through the 12 months or however many months it takes to carry out this investigation, where it's structured as a tree of questions where you have a question, you answer it in a certain way, you have another set of questions. And so it's kind of a very slow motion it's similar to some of the automated tools that Bonnie's organization has, but it's a very long-term process, and it's been, I hope some of you were able to click on the links. Oren.
Yeah, I think, Chris, you're touching a very important issue. It's about, how you work with communities that have no idea what's the terms legal mean. They know how to tell stories, to bring the story into effective evidence that you can use later on. And especially if you're working internationally, you're working in a variety of cultures that everyone sees storytelling as a different aspect. So it's one challenge that it's existing there. What I'm going to talk about a bit about, how you use the tool to be able to create verification. Verification is one of my favorite topics. It's like something that is very important in our work, especially working with remote communities that filming by themselves and bringing the evidence. Then in the end, you have to go to court, or even to a news, to a media article, to media outlets that need also verification, of course. So with us, starting with how you train people to use the tool, what they have to document while they're documenting the event. So documenting just the killing or just the beating is not enough. We need to know the way, we need to know road sign, we need to see newspaper, we need to see watches, we need to see buildings, so we'll be able to locate the place that the event was happening. So we're training people about how to document these signs around so we can know where we are. And then you can verify it by looking at Google Maps and then looking at the time of the day and looking at all kind of stuff that will have to position the location. Another important thing is the source. one of the most important thing when you want to verify information is where is the source coming from. Is the source that you know who uploaded the video. If it's video somebody been uploading, you have to be able to trace the source back. Especially if you're talking about, the legal system that you have to bring sometimes the one that took the visuals into court. So you have to be able to trace and understand where they are. You have to understand all the physical action in the materials itself. Sometimes people speaking in native languages that we don't understand have all kind of meanings. And we came across a variety of videos that we have 5 people arguing from the same tribe. What's the meaning of the word that somebody said? Now go bring it to court. Extremely complicated. And then you have all the metadata on the technical issue that you can examine and see and use it also. So this is kind of very generally about the verification process itself. A lot of time we're bringing information. A lot of our material is coming to journalists, less to court. When it's coming to court, this is the end game, and our aim, the legal system is just part of the way we used to put pressure to create a change on the ground. So we use the media, we use decision makers, we use all kind of campaigns. A lot of time we're bringing information that we can't verify it completely. We don't 100% understand and know and sure what we have there. But we're trying to do the most to collect the information to be able to give it to someone who can get more in-depth investigation to see what's happening in these places. And it's extremely important then we are building separate verification team that will go after with a set of questions and verify the visuals that we have. So this is practically how we're doing it.
Great. Bonnie, yes.
Can I suggest, I think one of the things when we're obviously talking about different types of law and different types of issues, that I think the bread and butter issues that people face on a day-to-day are not that different from country to country. We're talking about human rights abuses and some very critical things that are also happening in the United States. Many of these things we're talking about, right, they're issues that are going on here. But as I talk to people throughout the world, the basic idea of empowerment to get the legal information that they need to handle their family law disputes or to handle their housing disputes, whatever it is, are very, very similar. And so we share our resources and say, if this is helpful, great. Our only suggestion is please don't build a system quite as complicated as we have done in the United States. You can do it, but there are just many things. And just as we look at evidence in the U.S., well, I'll just say we have the benefit in terms of trust that being a court system, we have a certain amount of trust. We only refer to nonprofit organizations. We have sort of built that network, and we have 5 million individual users of our self-help website each year. So there's a lot of usage. But I think that we really do have to rethink a lot of pieces of our system to make them simpler so more people have true access to resolve their legal problems.
Great. Alexa had a follow-up.
Thank you. And I agree that I think the baseline problems are the same no matter where you are. I think when you get in a conflict zone, it's just an exacerbation of those same vulnerabilities that often appear. There's an effort called First Responders, which has been kind of a coming together of a number of different nonprofits and just NGOs generally who are working in this overlapping space of law, technology, and human rights to try and figure out how to make these solutions simpler. So there certainly is, for us at least, working with courts, this need for verification, authentication of the information that's coming in. So how, when you do have people who are mobilized either with the kinds of tools that Oren provides or are just using their smartphones to gather information, there's little bits of information that if they know about that, they can actually have greater impact with their work. So for example, one of the issues that we've seen with courts is that you have a lot of people who take a picture or a video of a crime as it's happening and they're focusing on just the person who's fallen or been shot or whatever, but they're not taking a moment to just kind of get some surrounding information about where they are. That simple addition suddenly raises the value of that video so that if they do want that video, they're taking risks to collect, to have some legal impact, even if they're not thinking of it in the moment, they can do so. So we're trying to figure out, A, tech solutions of how do you disseminate that very simple information quite broadly, but then the non-tech solutions of how do you also educate people to use these tools. And then finally, in terms of the simplification issue, there are a number of NGOs who are trying to partner with the tech industry right now to figure out how you capture the information courts need automatically when video is taken, when pictures are taken, so that it's there and the user doesn't have to be thinking about that in the moment.
Great, thank you. So I see that suddenly it's 4 o'clock with this really interesting panel. So I'm going to just kind of move a little bit into this idea of cracking open this box of information that is traditionally accessible only through lawyers or through experts, and kind of throw out that general question to each of you is like, what is the vision and mission of your organization and your work in terms of this cracking open of a box that's, usually protected by leagues of experts? And I'll let you, well, I'll start with Jake.
Sure. So Casetext's mission and our mission statement inside the company is to make all the world's laws free and understandable. And we do that, as I said before, in a number of ways. The biggest way and the most important way is by, as we were talking about earlier, a community-based versus a top-down approach. Our belief is that in order to make information free, the modes of creation of that information can't be kind of the old way of doing things. Back before the internet, when you published books, it'd be impossible to coordinate thousands of people to write a chapter of a book because that'd just be writing a lot of letters. But with the internet, you can now do things where you can have everybody doing a small amount to help contribute to making a greater whole. And that's lessons from the websites that's probably shaped some of our lives the most, whether it be Google or Wikipedia or Yelp. I check Yelp probably once a day each time I go out to eat. I don't go out to eat that much anymore now that I have a startup. But whenever I did, that's the resource I go to because it's a different mode of creation of information than the things that it replaced, like Zagat, that rely more on more people to add smaller bits of information to create something that, as a whole, is something that's much more impressive. And from our perspective, the law could use that too. We're starting with the United States, although we do intend to go global in the near future. And in everywhere you go, whether it be individuals trying to access the law or lawyers trying to help individuals, especially those who can't access justice, at the current prices being offered, the ability to access information in a cheap way really comes down to whether or not you can produce information that, whether it's by a community and thus going to be a lot cheaper because a lot of people are doing something for free that adds up to a greater whole, or whether you're hiring, thousands and thousands of editors to kind of contribute to a resource. And that's the major reason why we took the community-based approach that we did.
Great. I want to add just kind of something so that I don't have any more questions and we can open the floor to questions. And you can answer either one or both of the questions, the rest of the group. Aside from the issue of, as I said, cracking open a box of information, I wanted to look at the issue of sustainability, meaning training communities to use advocacy, empowering them, and not just merely legal tools, but also other advocacy tools. Whether we are thinking of geographically specific communities that are remote, as in the case of Oren, or we're thinking of a specific set of communities, as in the case of Bonnie. How do you view your work and the use of technology as facilitating sustainable community activism or sustainable access to justice by communities? How do you hope that your intervention and assistance actually changes either the culture or the practices or the approaches of specific communities for the improvement of either human rights or access to justice? So I'll see whoever wants to take it first. Alexa?
So our mission has really been to figure out what are the needs of survivors by talking with them directly and bringing those concerns to people who are in positions to do something about it. We've been focusing a lot on 4 different areas: sexual violence and conflict, using DNA technology to bring together families torn apart by war. We have a program that focuses on courts and evidence in courts, and then one that's focused on this tech and human rights. The way that we've tried to go about addressing these issues is by becoming a hub. So we're seeing there's a real need for translation between many different groups who are working on these problems. So specifically, we've been focusing in on the legal sector, the tech sector, and then sort of this NGO human rights organizations group. They all speak 3 radically different languages. I always tell law students on their first day of law school that they're going going into a language immersion program for 3 years, and that's really what they're getting from this process. So to be able to bring these groups together and to translate between them so that they can coordinate more effectively is the way that we see ultimately making this more sustainable. That also means then creating new hubs in the communities in which we're working, whether in Uganda or somewhere in Central America, and having other groups who can do that translating and coordination work to make sure that this becomes sustainable in different parts of the world and becomes really, truly a bottom-up approach.
Great, thank you.
So one of the ways to do it, and we do build sustainable network of people, is we usually, when we go into a project, we're not working on specific, there is an issue that's leading us, but the idea is to give them the tools, the skills, and the model to be able to apply for poverty, the things happening in their community. We used to train a wonderful group of women in one of the countries in Africa that we are working in, and they monitor hate speeches that have been done by politicians. And after the election, I just said, we have a great tool. Let's amplify it on women's rights and other issues, FGM and other stuff that they can use it. So they use the same tool, the same model, the same technology, just to look in a different aspect. And they need to make it sustainable, like any business, you want to make sure that there is a need. So if they feel that they have a new tool to address different needs, then they will continue doing it. And we train our trainers in the community that know more about how to deliver and how to help them. And a whole mechanism of feedback while they're filming to make sure that they really embracing the tool and know how to work with it. Because technology can be very, very intimidating to a lot of people if they don't know how to work with it. You have to make it simple, and then it's becoming sustainable.
Fantastic. Bonnie, and then Chris, and then Jake.
Well, I think by providing content and information for people throughout, that it becomes extremely easily accessible. I think that's a big part of it. And then hooking people up with appropriate referrals. One of the things that happens for poor people is they get kind of referred from place to place to place, and we don't know how to help you, so maybe those people over there will do something for you. And it's a huge waste of their time, and it's also not a great use of the agency's time. And so trying to come up with better mechanisms to help people identify what they really need and how to get to the right place. I think our goal is really to hook in with agencies. The California court's first goal in our strategic plan is to increase access to justice for all people. And so part of that is reaching out to communities. Part of that is making sure everyone knows that they're welcome in the courts. And part of that is providing education. There's also judicial education as part of this, right? You're the judge. There are two people in front of you who have a legal issue who don't understand the law. You, as the judge, have to know it. And you have to, be able to figure out what they really need, but you also have to know the law. So providing education to the judges is also really critical, and having more online resources so that they can get what they need at the time they need it is also really critical. So I just think it's a technology just allows us to do so much more than if we had books or if we had just paper that we can send out. It allows much more searching. It allows much more just-in-time resources. It allows much more multilingual content. So I think that's the great benefit, in making sure that people know that it's available is part of the challenge.
Great. So the sustainability question for Chris, and please, everybody feel free to kind of tackle the question of whether technology is actually necessary for this or not.
Yeah, so I guess I go back to my understanding of how development happens. And if development is fundamentally about power relationships and power dynamics, technology and laws often are not going to solve one of the critical realms of power, which has to do with people's own sense of their marginalization and desperation and lack of power. That the first obstacle, I think, to a lot of development work is just getting people to have them overcome that sense of resignedness that nothing can change, and the sense of despair, because so much of the world is stacked against them. And technology and lawyers are often not well equipped to deal with that level of power. And it's very hard to mobilize people if they're not, if they don't really feel that they have any real chance. And so the tool that we work with, I think at the first level, its aim is to bring people together, create a platform for a discussion framed by a different set of norms that don't give them any false expectations that a courtroom is going to change their life for them, but rather give them a sense of their collective ability to reimagine some other dynamic with the actor, in this case, the large companies that are that have had all the advantages. And so the tool, as a first step, really is just about getting people to start having that conversation collectively with some outsider groups, with other stakeholders, and using it as a framework and as a point of reference and as sort of a focal point. And I think that oftentimes bringing folks together needs something like that. It needs a common focus, it needs a common objective, and when they work through their issues and they put it onto paper and they start using that as a way of advocacy in lots of informal realms, more political realms, and they can bring it to their Congress, or they can take it to the media, or they can force it on their, use shareholder activism in different countries, or maybe they take it to a human rights body. The last thing would probably be some kind of a national courtroom. Maybe that is on the agenda or not, but just that act of getting them together, framing it, working through it with a different sort of sensibility, that's a realm of empowerment, I guess, and I hate these terms because they're so wishy-washy, especially for a tech crowd. I know you have no patience for these terms, but really, out in the field, I think it's so important because you can't get far until people do start re-envisioning things in some fashion, and that's really what the tool, I think, is there to serve.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm going to open the floor to questions and then give maybe Jake the first chance to answer them, since I'm closing off before we finish. So if anybody has questions, please come up to the microphones.
Hi there, Paul Gowder again. So I hate to steal from Jake and hand back to Oren, but I kind of want to because I find Oren's project so exciting. And I think just thinking about the Black Lives Matter movement in the US and how we might leverage this kind of thing, but then thinking a step further. So a lot of the injustice we see, at least in the US and possibly abroad, is more what we might think of as the small scale stuff. It's not, it is the beatings and the killings, but it's also the little stuff. It's the day-to-day police harassments. How can we leverage these kinds of tools to also, in a sense, market resistance to the little stuff as well? Do you guys have thoughts on how we can capture that as well as the huge stuff?
Wow. First of all, I think documentation is extremely important. It's happening more and more. And, we're working in places when there is very hard to get access to these kind of tools, but, around you here, they are all over. How many cases you saw lately with the police shooting someone in the street you never saw before? So I guess, this is the first step. It's kind of, the facts that people are filming. Someone have to start scanning it and putting it in boxes and understand how you can create, because in the end of the day, it's not about the documentation itself. Documentation means nothing if it's not being used correctly to create a change. If you don't have the right effort and the right venue to use this information, it's worth nothing. So I think the question is not about what we can document, it's about really what we can do with it. And then you can look at variety of layers, from corruption to violence to even domestic violence, on understanding how you can use and how you deal with it. And all this concept of visual is a new concept. What I'm doing today I could not do 10 years ago, because camera would cost me 20 times more than it costs me today. Today I'm buying a cheap equipment from China in $20 and shifting it and changing it to put it in clothes somewhere in Africa. So I guess there is a lot of things to do about new opportunities, and I think the system, or the big system, or the law enforcement authorities and others don't grab yet the potential of all these images that we are about to see in the next coming years. So I think we have to start thinking about what's the effect you want to create, and then back engineering the whole process to give the camera to somebody. Very general and very theoretical.
So I just wanted to add one answer to that, which is, if we think about the packaging here, like a lot of us work on how to create effective narratives for advocacy. And when you talk about what, are not microaggressions, there might be smaller aggressions, right? Smaller day-to-day humiliations, and how do you both document and present those in a package that is an effective package of advocacy to represent the daily experience of somebody so that others can empathize. And I think that that is a combination of technology, right, using crowdsourced video, but it's also a combination of technology with traditional human rights and civil rights advocacy techniques, which have to do with understanding a narrative, opportunity, and timing for the presentation and use of that. So again, I think that especially in the human rights realm, we're very much working on using technology, but still developing the skills in traditional effective human rights advocacy, because those are not a given, because a lot of communities who engage in human rights activism engage in it out of necessity, and it surprises them, and it comes at them, and they haven't studied and prepared for it. So that's always continuing. So Nicole.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much. This is I'm Nicole Shanahan, Codex Fellow, and this is the most exciting panel for me today, and to see this be included in the more typical Codex curriculum. My question is about regaining trust and how the government kind of does want to regain the trust of underserved communities. What is the favorite program that you've seen a government either initiate, successfully, unsuccessfully talk about, that you want to see grow, and maybe a way that this other larger legal tech community can contribute to those efforts.
I'll probably won't have a great answer, but I think the core, obviously, of human rights practice has traditionally been about how do you empower citizens on the ground who are facing abuses from the state, from their government, to actually be able to stand up and begin to address some of those issues. I think the biggest thing is transparency. So whenever governments are able to provide greater transparency around their objectives, their policies, why they're doing what they're doing, and what they intend to do to stop it, that's when you begin to get trust. And that's also an area where I think technology can help, because technology can certainly help amplify messages. It can also aggregate data. It can be used in so many different ways to actually help a population understand what its government has done and intends to do. And without that transparency, you can't have trust.
So is that like open data? So there's been various government data initiatives, open data. Is it like that, or is there something more specific? Because I've been looking at some of that, and it hasn't been that well developed so far.
It hasn't, and I think there's a danger, honestly, in particularly big data, because obviously you can hide a lot in big data, and it depends on how you interpret it and how you sift through it. So I think one thing we also have to be cautious of is governments who are purporting to be transparent, and yet have a population that knows enough about what's happening on the ground to push back if what the government is saying just doesn't concord with what is the lived reality on the ground.
Yeah, in the court system, we talk about the importance of public trust and confidence and procedural fairness. And the research indicates that what people who go to court care about is how they were treated by the court. Did they feel like they were listened to? Did they feel like they were respected? Did they feel like somebody actually cared about them in the system? They get it that they may well lose in court. But what they care about, I mean, not that they don't care that they win their case, but how they were treated is often much more important than what the actual results are, which is sort of different than how an attorney often perceives their court experience. So it's incredibly important for the courts. And one of the things that we find with these self-help centers is they help explain to people what to expect, how to prepare, what's likely to happen, why the judge might have done whatever the judge did. It's sort of, taking away sort of the black box part of it and providing some reasonable expectations for people and some idea about what to do. So in terms of programs, I think that's incredibly valuable, and the website can do that to a certain degree. But I think the other thing that's just incredibly important that we haven't really touched on, to my mind yet, is social media. When I think about the kinds of changes, maybe it's my friends on Facebook, but every day I'm seeing things about microaggression, and I'm seeing video, and it's making me think about how we work in our society, besides, seeing the very challenging videos about police treatment of youth of color. But I think we need to really be mindful that people's expectations are out, many of our expectations, our information is really being shaped by social media. So I think that we, in terms of government, really have to think through our message and have to get information out and listen to what people are saying. And actually respond to what people are saying, not just, the top-down approach as well.
Great. So we started 5 minutes late, and we're finishing 5 minutes late. So I know that there's a next panel, and people want to get to it. So I want to thank our panelists, and I'm so sorry that I won't get to hear more, but this was fantastic. Thank you so much.